Hello everyone, this is FIDE Master Viktor Neustroyev. Welcome to our webinar. Today we're going to talk about tactics and actually also some strategic plans in Modern Benoni or Modern Benoni Defense. So for example, on the board you can see a pawn structure which usually happens in Modern Benoni. We are going to mainly look at Benoni as black, because this is a very sharp opening which allows black to play for a win. So while we are preparing for the webinar, please let me know which country you are from and what's your rating. If it's FIDE rating, it's good. If you just have your local rating, let's say for example USCF or any other national rating or even chess.com rating, just tell me your chess.com rating. Please let me know if the sound and video quality is good. Okay, so John from Ireland is 1592. Good. So yeah, I'm streaming it on Twitch as well as at the Chessland's website. And of course, Chessland's YouTube. There is a problem with with a stream on, well, maybe it's actually fine. Let me check it out. Okay, Brian, thank you for joining on my YouTube channel. If you think Twitch is better, join Twitch because I definitely see all your comments, guys. Okay, what else do we have? So we have also John, who has a FIDE rating about 2100, but only 1970 USCF. I actually thought that USCF is usually lower than FIDE. Okay, Chris is about 1090. Perfect. Okay, I'm just checking that everything works, because yeah, it looks like it works on Twitch. It works on all my platforms, which is really good. Well, I actually also started streaming it on kick.com. So if you find me there, it would be great. You can also find my stream there. However, not sure if it works. Okay, I definitely did start the stream, but looks like something goes wrong with it. Okay, never mind. Anyway, let's talk about Benoni defense. So take a look at this position. Well, there are no kings, there are no pieces, but it's mainly about the pawn structure, because very often the pawn structure defines the plan. And this is what I, for example, demonstrate in my course, a planning guide for club players, where your plan depends on the pawn structure on the board. So by looking at this pawn structure and imagining that this is a middle game, there are a lot of pieces on the board, queens, rooks, knights, and some bishops. Let's say all the pieces are on the board. What plans would you consider for white? So there are several things white can do, and I'm asking for what would you do if you were white, having in mind that the board is full of pieces. Okay, so I'm waiting for your suggestions. Well, oh, Chris, can you clarify what means that you aim to castle on the D file? What does it mean? So you want to castle a queen side, and how does it help you? Uh, so there is also suggestion of fortifying the e4 pawn, f4 and d5, a pawn break. So yes, this is definitely a possible plan for white. This is where I agree with you. Well, g6, bishop g7 is likely to be played from black. Now we are talking about white mainly. So f4 and e5 is one of the plans. What else? Because it's definitely not the only thing that white can do. However, this is a more popular line, and sometimes f4 is played immediately. This is what we'll see in one of the games. Sometimes the knight goes to d2, from f3 it goes to d2, then to c4. However, the position of the knight has to be secured with a4 move to stop b5, and only after knight gets to d2 or to c4, then such move like f4, let me mark it with a different color, f4, and then e5 is played. So this is common. I agree with you. What else? Okay, I got, Chris, I got your point. You want to promote on the D file by doing E5 immediately. That makes sense too. So E5 without F4 is also a good plan in order to get the D pawn as a pass pawn. Sometimes this pass pawn may decide the game. Yeah, if you decide to move the knight to C4, then definitely the position of the knight should be secured with A4 move. Okay, right. What else? Mhm. Okay, so what else? Uh-huh, uh-huh. Okay, looks like there is queenside attack. What about the queenside attack for white? Well, I don't think that the queenside attack is possible here. I doubt. Yeah, well, a queenside attack can be possible, but if, let's say, you play rook b1 and b4, so by doing b4, you want to undermine the pawn on c5, and you also may open the b file and pressure the b7 pawn with your rook. That makes sense, right? I agree with you. So what do we have finally? E5 right away, getting the pass pawn on the d file, f4 e5, getting two pawns in the center, which will destroy the black's position 100%. So this is the most common plan. We also have the idea of rook b1 b4 undermining c5 and opening the b file. And another idea is to play f4, f5 and focus on the kingside attack. This is more rare, but anyway, this is what deserves attention. Let's now switch flip the board and talk about the plans for black. So what black should do. Here you may definitely say that something like b5 supported with a6 is a good idea, right? But with a6 b5, what's the point? I mean, yes, you are likely to play these moves and get the pawn to b5, but how do you continue after that? So of course, g7 and g6 and bishop g7 has to be played, and probably you need to control the e5 square, or maybe even knight d7, knight e5. Okay, when you play a6 b5, the idea of such a move is usually connected with b4 chasing the knight away, which will weaken the pawn on a4. Together with this, you may consider playing c5 instead, c5, c4 instead, in order to vacate the c5 square for your knight, which goes from b8 to d7. So this is probably the most popular plan. There can be some pressure through the e-file with the rook to prevent black from playing e5. What else? Another plan which is not so common but can be combined with other ideas is h5, h4 and initiate the attack on the king side, or at least chase the knight away if the knight is on g3. And of course there is such a move like f5, undermining the pawn. It usually works really well when the pawn is on f4, but for some reason, maybe because black has more control over the e5 square, white is not ready to push the pawn. Then undermining with f5 is definitely a good idea. Okay, so this is the list of the plans. Well, sometimes we also develop this knight to a6 and c7 in order to support b5, like John suggested. But if you see that e5 is more important, play this move. However, sometimes you cannot play knight d7 because the enemy bishop is on f4 attacking the pawn on d6. And if we have already our bishop fianchetted on g7, d6 is vulnerable. Okay, this is asymmetric Benoni, which usually happens when we play the modern Benoni defense, modern Benoni defense. So, well, why I'm saying it in a different way? Well, in English, modern means something that is common nowadays. It is translated to Russian because I got used to learn this opening when I was mainly talking on Russian only, and well, when I was a kid. And in Russian we say we don't translate the word modern. We instead say modern, which we also understand as something which is common nowadays. So that's why sometimes I'm a bit confused by not pronouncing it properly. Okay, so modern Benoni defense, and this line usually happens when the old Benoni is played. So here the pawn is on c4, and according to my practice and according to other chess players may say, having the pawn on e4 rather than on c4 is more preferable. However, when you see that there is a pawn on c4 and d5, what you can suggest for white? What kind of plans? So waiting for your comments, guys. B3. Well, yeah, well, you can play B3, but how do you benefit of this move? And it's actually not a plan, just one move. And I'm not sure that this move makes any sense. It makes sense in order to support the pawn on c4 if, let's say, the pawn is undermined with b5, but it cannot be a plan. Well, you can't undermine the g6. Yeah, that's right. So pieces must attack the d6. True. That's why the bishop comes to f4 very often, pressuring this pawn. That's right. So, for example, this knight may go to b5, but usually it goes to e4 because b5 is secured. And the bishop is somewhere on f4 or g3, yes, and with such moves you can pressure the pawn on d6. This is one of the plans, so Peter is absolutely correct. Well, yeah, rooks to the open file. Let's imagine that you already castled, so having the rook on e1 is definitely a good idea. Well, this pawn structure is not so common for you, and I think that it's harder to come up with a plan. But let me just give you some ideas that you may think once you meet a similar position. It can make sense to continue with f4 and g4 to expand space and to initiate a kingside attack, even when the center is open. Why it's possible to advance the pawns from the king side and at the same time not weaken your king? It is possible because black doesn't have many pieces into the attack and can hardly focus on our king. Instead, they typically play on the queen side. And if f4 is played, it's very often when they play f5 to stop it. So f4 and g4 is one of the plan with the attack. Peter also mentioned the plan of attacking d6 with bishop and knight. Sometimes it can be this move, b4, in order to open the b file, and also then consider c5, undermining the pawn on d6 and creating the pass pawn on the d file. And that's it, actually. Because usually when white tries to open the position on the queen side, it provides black with more opportunities of initiating their activity on that flank. What black should do? So I understand that this position is a bit hard for you. We assume there is a fiancetta, and here black should maybe try to occupy the e4 square with the knight, support the knight, and having the knight on e4 on e4 later provides black with more options and some other plans. b5 is definitely a good idea, even b5 without a6, because after c takes b5, the d5 pawn becomes vulnerable. Exchanging minor pieces is still a good idea for black. Why? Because it's obvious that black experiences a lack of space, and they need more room to maneuver with their pieces. If they initiate a few exchanges, it will be easier to maneuver with the pieces left. And well, the main plan is this. So that's why another plan for black is to look at how black can disrupt this piece's activity, this pawn's activity, and the kingside attack. So it's something like f5 or maybe something else, depends on the concrete position, but the plan can be to disrupt the white's plan. Okay, so symmetric Benoni is not what we are going to talk about today, but I'm sure you need to know, because these pawn structures are similar, but the plans differ. So having the pawn on e4 against on c4 is preferable. Okay, so today I prepared several games for you, and we start with this game. Yeah, let me check your question. So black should... it's clear, lack of space, but tactical play. Yes, so this is the reason why black chooses this opening, because of the tactical play and the ability to overtake the initiative. Because d4, d5 can be quite boring. However, this is what I play, for example. Well, d4, c5, or d4, knight f6, c4, and then c5 leads to a symmetric position. However, if you talk, for example, to a strong grandmaster, he would definitely say that modern Benoni is more favorable for white because of more space and the very clear plan of doing e4, f4, and e5. Recently, I was talking to Grandmaster Robert Hangaski, who lives here in Argentina, and he said that, well, he would prefer playing it for white, and so white is strategically much better. Okay, anyway, let me check your comments and we'll start with the analysis of our first game. Okay, fine, let's continue. So d4, this is how the game started. Knight f6, c4, c5, d5, and e6. Knight c3, take, pawn takes, d6 is played. This limits the d-pawn activity. The pawn goes to e4 and g6. Well, if white chooses knight f3 strategy, then bishop d3, castle, maybe h3 to not let bishop go to g4, then rook e8, castle, knight bd7, and then white initiates this plan with the idea of knight d2, f4, knight c4, and then trying to do e5. That looks really nice. However, in this game, white started with f4 right away. Bishop g7. e5 right now is a mistake. Knight fd7. No, not take, because if this happens, then it's favorable for white. But if knight fd7, then you cannot really advance the pawn to e6 because you're gonna lose this pawn. It will be attacked with the bishop as well as with the knight from e6. So, but taking on d6, castle, and these pawns are vulnerable. So these pawns are vulnerable, and there is no advantage, especially having the king on e1. Okay, so there is a good point that here it's possible to take and then play knight here. Well, I'm not 100% sure that this is a good idea, actually. Why? Because, well, this time e6 looks more dangerous. Always I want you to keep an eye on such a move like queen h4, but looks like it doesn't work here. So take, take. And if the knight goes there, I think that after this move, white is winning. How white is winning? So, for example, check. If king goes to c7, then it's e7, or knight d5 and then e7. So king goes there, then maybe e7, knight goes to e6. Oh, wait, let me deliver this check first. Well, I'm sure you understand that this position cannot be good for black anymore. Well, for example, just castle. Even if we sacrifice the pawn on e6, it's still fine. So no, knight taken, then knight fd7 is extremely risky. That's why bishop b5 was played. The idea is that once bishop d7 is played, then e5 is possible. Because d takes e5, f takes e5, knight goes there, and after knight f3, white achieved what they wanted. And black doesn't know how to continue. And if this move, which seems like a good idea, white just takes, it's a complete blunder, the bishop is pinned. So bishop d7 is a mistake. That's why knight fd7, which is correct. a4, a6. So a4, well, of course, white is not going to take this knight on d7, because then the other knight replaces. So a4 is played to prevent a6 b5. So a6 is played, the bishop retreats, and now b5 cannot be played. So a4 was important. However, queen h4, g3, and queen goes to d8. With g3, black wanted to provoke a weakness into the white's camp. Knight f3, castle, castle. Knight goes to f6. And this is where it could make sense for white to consolidate the position first with maybe such move like king g2, then move their queen away, try to bring the rook to e1 and advance the pawn to e5. That would be really nice strategy. White is better now. But white plays such a move like queen b3. And this move is already an accuracy. So rook h3. Maybe this is what black overlooked. So what can you say about queen b7 in this position? Because the rook is hanging here, but after queen b7, the a8 rook is hanging. What do you think? Can black... can white in this position capture on b7? Okay, so there is a bishop hanging. Yeah, there is a bishop hanging on d3. That's absolutely correct. So once queen b7 is played, for example, it's bishop f1, and if queen takes this rook, it's the bishop hanging. That's right. That's why this move has to be played, and then knight bd7, they save their rook. So that's why here they have to move the rook. Well, it seems logical to continue with b6 maybe, but instead black plays knight g4, attracting the queen to b7. And this is one of the tactical ideas that we are going to talk about today. White took the pawn on b7, but their queen is completely distracted and doesn't participate in the place of action, which now switches to the center and to the king side too. And after queen b7, the queen there can be trapped as well. Right now the rook is hanging, so knight d7 is a must. After which a5 was played. Why a5? What if, for example, white just plays any random move? What would happen? Who can find a tactical strike for black already in this position? Which seems to be quite... well, it's a complicated position, but it seems there are no tactical motives to initiate. So, can you please think about what black should do? And while you're thinking, I'm going to provide you with some hints. For example, well, the king has just fewer squares. It's actually only h1 and the square where it is. The queen is also in a dangerous position. I'm not saying that black can trap it immediately, but black can definitely improve their pieces and at the same time gain tempi on this queen by attacking this queen. So this is what I mean. Okay, so now I'm waiting for your suggestions. What do you have in mind? Well, rook b8 and then bishop c3. Well, rook b8, queen a6, you take on c3, I take, and this rook is not hanging because there is a bishop here. So it's not an issue. What else? Maybe c4 first? Okay, c4, c4 if bishop c... Okay, c4, bishop c4, then you do this. then bishop c3 works. Well, true, but c4, they can move bishop to c2. They may not take the pawn. Anything else? Who can tell me? Okay, Brian thinks that g5 is the idea of bringing the knight to... Well, g5 works only in case if they take. If they do not take, you may capture there, but they improve the bishop, or maybe they take with the pawn. You may slightly expose the king, but g5, what if they just take with the knight? Oh, no, it's not beneficial. Taken with the... Well, okay, g5 deserves attention, but I don't think they take. What else? f5. No, f5 for black doesn't make sense. Okay, so here the idea is to play bishop d4 check. What now? If the king goes to h1, it's easy. Just a fork and discover the attack. Maybe, well, maybe kind of a windmill. So take here, the rook is hanging. King goes there, you can take the rook actually. I think this is the best move. Well, you can do another check, but what I don't like is that they can play bishop a3. So at this point, you'd better take the rook. So that's why king h1 loses the game. Instead, we should analyze this move. But this is a tempo gaining move. Now the knight has to move, doesn't matter where. And after knight c5, this is a fork. After which they at least lose this bishop. So queen goes to the safe spot, which is which? It's not c6 because then the queen is trapped. So it should be b4. The queen is not trapped, but this is another fork and the position becomes completely losing. So this is a threat. And in order to stop this threat, a5 is played. So you may ask me, well, what's going on? How a5 helps? Looks like a5 is useless as rook b1. No, it's not, because this time, if this tactics is initiated, then it's knight a4 and knight c5 no longer works. However, it's possible to just take on a5 then. And black is still fine. Oh, we do not blunder this knight because the rook is hanging. Okay, so a5 was played, queen to e7, and this is where white played a greedy move. They decided to take on a6. However, such a move like queen b3 would be better. In such a case, the game would maybe continue with queen c4 and knight c5, with pawn to c4 and knight c5 anyway, to bring more pieces into the attack. And black is still fine, but at the same time, I don't think that white is losing. It's gonna be approximately equal. So bishop c4, knight c5, queen c2, and black has initiative. White has 2 pawns. But in the game, instead, it was bishop a6. This is a greedy move, and because of that move, white lost the game. What do you think? What's the best way to exploit this mistake? Okay, so yeah, I didn't notice, but finally John suggested bishop d4. So bishop a6, what's wrong with this move? Okay, so rook b8, Perumal, which rook goes to b8? Maybe it's not so important, but I'm sure that one rook move is better than the other rook move. The queen is the only defender for the bishop, right? But let's say you play this move, the queen goes to c6, and it's still defending on a6. How would you continue after that, by the way? Okay, John suggests this rook to b8, and after queen c6, it's this, rook b4. Well, maybe. Maybe c4 can be played as well. And after queen takes c4, knight c5 looks good. The bishop has to move, probably. Okay. So rook a b8 was played in the game, but the best move was rook f b8. Now queen has to go to c4 only. You can deliver a check. Again, king h1 looks like a mistake. Because there is knight f2 always. So king h1, for example, then you continue with this move. They go there, then knight d3. And even if they take here, so we can do what? We can take the rook first, and this knight is under attack. So it's a completely winning position for black. So that's why knight takes d4, c takes d4. Now this knight is hanging and it has to move. So let's say if it goes there, then the bishop is trapped, and the bishop is completely lost. How can they defend it? Well, maybe with this move. But if this move is played, it's just rook a7, and now the knight is trapped. If they just move the knight to e2, it's queen e4 with a strong attack and a checkmate. If the knight goes to d1, it's knight c5. So same thing happens if the knight goes to b1. The bishop is hanging, so probably it has to retreat. Maybe to f1 or maybe to c4. If to c4, then you play this move. The queen has to go there, but after this move, the queen is completely trapped. If it goes to f1, then you can exchange and play rook a6, which also traps the queen. So the only other option is to move the knight to a4, where the knight can successfully protect the c5 square. However, what do you think black should do in such a case after knight a4 is played? So, what do you think? f5 is interesting. But I think f5 just bishop d3. So if you play f5, just bishop d3. You can find a better move. Okay. Let me show you. It's just knight d5, which is a fork. We blunder one knight, well, not blunder, just sacrifice, and then we threaten with a fork on f3. A very important thing is that this bishop is still hanging. So if, for example, they had a chance to play queen c3, or maybe at some other moves that would defend the rook, well, let's say queen c2, knight f3, king goes to f2, and let's say they take here with the king, it looks okay for white. But the problem is that the bishop is hanging. If the bishop wasn't hanging, it was okay. So knight e5 is a tactical strike. Well, something similar happened in the game. Rook a b8. Queen goes to c7. And now, this brilliant move, knight d e5. Sacrificing the queen. So queen takes here, knight f3 check. King goes to h1, knight f2 is a mate. That's why here white struggles with two pieces being hanging simultaneously. If they take here, they lose the queen. And if they do not take or not defend this knight, it's just a checkmate with two knights and the bishop. So this is one of the tactics. Here, this tactical idea is based on the weakened position of the king and attraction of the enemy queen to b7, where black could exploit the queen's position and have two ideas. One is to trap the queen, the other is to attack the queen with pieces and at the same time improve these pieces. For example, it's knight d7, c4, and knight goes to c5. Or bishop d4, knight d4, c takes d4, and then the knight goes to c5. So by attacking the queen, black improved their pieces and would improve their activity, as well as obtain some initiative. However, in the game, they were able to trap the queen. Okay, so we are done with it, and let's continue with the next example. d4, knight f6, c4, c5, so d5, this is the theory, of course. Bishop d3, bishop g7, knight f3, a6, a4. So white plays naturally. Black plays bishop g4, castle, castle, h3. What do you think in this position black should do? Well, they have two options. I don't think this is a good idea because of g4, so they have to take to move the bishop back to d7, or maybe even move the bishop back to c8 to let the knight to go to d7. What is the best? Yeah, take the knight. Take the knight is the best option because otherwise bishop g4 doesn't make any sense. And while you take the knight, you also get the control over the e5 square. So the knight goes there. This is a very common idea. E5 in Benoni and even in modern Benoni is for the knight. Sometimes for the bishop, but usually the knight has a strong power there. So queen goes back. Rook e8, bishop f4, attacking it, queen e7, rook f e1, and how would you play for black in this position? So we know typical plans, b5 doesn't work, it's just a blunder, h5, h4 doesn't make sense, doing f5 probably, but there is a knight blocking it, but even if there was no knight, what about e takes f5? Looks like this is a pawn loss. So black needs to find something. Maybe knight e5 looks natural, and this can be our candidate move, but they move the bishop to c2, then this bishop back, and then they try to play f4 to chase our knight away and threaten with e4, e5. So knight e5 at least now looks really suspicious because of the prospects of playing this plan. So g5 to deflect the bishop. Well, and this is a pin. Knight a5 and bishop d4. So knight h5, you mean, and then bishop d4. Well, yeah, knight h5 definitely makes sense. So this bishop is actually usually a good bishop, but you can hardly find how to use it in this position. Yeah, bishop on d4, but maybe it's the object of the attack. So they definitely move their queen away and can consider knight e2. Here, Levan Patsulaya, a strong grandmaster who was playing with black pieces, finds another plan. It's knight h5. The bishop goes there to keep pressure on these two squares, especially the pawn on d6. And instead of bishop d4, which is an interesting idea, they play bishop e5. Because here the key point is to stop f4 and control the f4 square. For example, they take, the knight takes, or even the queen may take. Then this, or maybe knight f4 immediately if white allows black to play such a move. So here f4 is not possible, it's just a blunder. g4 means the knight goes to f4, either right now or after bishop h2, king h2, queen e5, then knight goes to f4. So it depends on what black has in mind. Queen d2 was played to control this square. You may take and deliver a check. That looks good, but they consider g3 after that, and then f4 may be an issue for you. That's why queen h4. This move secures the f4 square and makes g3 impossible. Well, that was the game between 1900 player against 25 plus 100 player. 2500 plus. So what do you think? Does g3 make any sense in this position or not? It blocks the bishop, but this is not an issue. What about queen h3? Because if the queen has to retreat somewhere else, then f4 may be a problem for black. Not the most serious problem, but something really annoying. So what do you think? Queen h3, bishop d4, knight g3. Well, this is, it looks like a plan, but the problem is that queen h3 is already a mistake. Yes, it's a perpetual. I would say not a perpetual, but a repetition, because perpetual is about the king. But this is a repetition, and it's a permanent attack of the queen. So the queen goes there, bishop e2, and the queen has no better spots but to move back. So that's why white was okay to draw the game in case of g3, queen h3. And if after g3 the queen doesn't move to h3, doesn't take the pawn, and let's say goes to f6, then it's f4, which is now favorable for white. So probably in this case, instead of doing queen to h4, it was better just to play queen f6 move. Okay, anyway, queen h4, bishop f5. This is what happened in the game, knight f5. Now, White demonstrated that he is not familiar with this type of the positions and made several mistakes. So rook e3, which looks natural. This move defends the pawn, the g3 square as well if needed. So looks quite natural. So knight goes there and bishop goes to f1. And that was already a mistake. So now together, these three pieces, a queen and two knights, can initiate a tactical strike. And I asked you to find which. So what do you think? What black should do here? So look at the position. Well, the queen can, together with knights, can threaten a mate, but looks like a checkmate is almost impossible in this position. That's why instead you should be looking for forks. Looks like knight c4 is not a possibility because of the bishop here. So this fork doesn't work. Does knight g4 make any sense? No, unlikely. Maybe this fork, but how is it possible? This square is attacked 2 times. Knight h3, well, who knows, maybe it requires some calculation. And g3 isn't a problem because of knight h3, after which the queen moves away. Okay, so knight takes g2. Okay, knight takes g2, bishop takes g2. What is the idea behind this move? Looks like you didn't achieve much. No, I don't think it's knight g2. What else? Okay, knight takes h3. Yeah, knight takes h3 is the move. What now? This is a check, and moving the king moving the king to the h file is a mistake because of knight f2, and after that the position is completely lost. So they have to take. They can take with the rook or they can take with the pawn. If now they take with the rook, then queen takes that rook. And if g takes h3, it's knight f3 fork, king moves, knight takes there, and then this knight is able to escape. It attacks e4 and then can also escape to b3 and d4 after that. So black gains a pawn and extra exchange. Well, so queen takes. What if they do not take? Well, if they do not take our queen, they are still down the exchange. If they take with the pawn, then we continue with queen g5, having in mind that the queen is pinned and there is no rook g3 move, which means that the king has moved, and once the king moves, it's another fork. This time we're forking the g1 square and the queen. So if the queen moves, it's queen g1 mate, and if rook takes, they just lose the queen. So this is another common tactical strike which can be initiated in Benoni, in modern Benoni defense, in case if black moves the majority of their pieces to the king side. Here they could successfully coordinate with two knights and the queen, and the most important factor was the control over the f4 square and the ability of the knight to occupy it. Okay, now this third example for today. So it was my friend Pavel Maletin playing with white pieces. Unfortunately, he lost this game to Vasily Papin. Let's take a look. So here the move order was slightly different, but it led to the same pawn structure. However, this time the bishop was fianchetted to g2, d6, knight c3, g6, bishop g2, bishop g7, knight f3, castle, castle a6, a4, knight b d7, bishop attacks the pawn, which is quite natural. Queen e7 has to be played. Here white decided to come up with this plan. h6, b4, c takes b4, rook takes b4. There is a long-term pressure, so it's actually good for white. But the disadvantage of doing this is that the knight can now occupy c5. Well, something like queen c1 with the pressure on h6 could be a good idea. King goes to h7, and then, I don't know, just a5 or some slow play. White trying to improve their pieces, maybe something like that. Maybe then knight goes to b6, or maybe it's just enough to put enough pressure on d6. That is the best thing that white could do in this position. Instead, they play e4, having in mind that the pawn on e4 is supported with the rook. So, for example, knight takes knight, and then this is a pin. So, for example, knight c3, just queen d2. And after this queen moves, this knight is trapped after knight d4 move. If instead black decides here to save with f5, then just knight d2, and the pawn is white wins the pawn back. They also activate their pieces. If g takes f4, then knight d2, and this is a queen attack. So I think after the queen moves, white gains a pawn back and gets a better position because of their perfect pawn structure comparing to what black has. That's why you cannot take the pawn after e4, but you can play bishop g4, h3, bishop f3. So you see, it's quite common to exchange such a bishop to the knight. Well, actually, the bishop has an open diagonal, but there are no squares to move to. These two are attacked. The d7, having the bishop on d7 makes almost no sense. And that's why black often chooses bishop g4, bishop takes f3. So bishop takes bishop. How would you play in this position? Oh, imagine you're playing with black pieces. There is no tactical strike at the moment, but I'm sure that you can take advantage of your piece's activity. Just close your eyes and imagine where your pieces should be located and how to transfer these pieces to that exact squares. So, well, my students often ask me, what if I don't have a plan? What should I do? What if I cannot come up with a plan? In such a case, the answer is that you should do one of two things. You should either look at your worst piece and try to improve it, or you can look for the enemy plan and try to disrupt it. So if you don't know what to play, at least try to improve your pieces. So black to move, what would you suggest? Knight d5, then knight takes d5. Yeah, knight fg7 is good. Okay, there is another question. Is keeping the bishop near the king is the best? It depends. Well, usually a fiancetta is considered the most solid formation if you are expecting a king side attack initiated against you. So if you're expecting your opponent initiates the attack, for example, like it usually happens in Dutch defense, then fianchetto is a good choice. Okay, yeah, knight goes to e5, so knight fd7. There is also attack of this knight. So, and here Pavel probably played too quickly. He played queen d2. The best option was to do knight e2 to remove the knight. Then the game would continue with this move. And if bishop g2, it's a fork on d3, which is quite unpleasant. I'm not saying we should take it immediately, but this position of the knight is really dangerous. a4 is also vulnerable. So I think that after knight e5, they have to take it. Then bishop takes, bishop g2 back with the idea of f4, bishop g7 as a preparation, and then f4. So white is actually fine here, but I cannot say that black pieces are located badly. However, queen d2 is a real mistake. What's wrong with this move? And how you can initiate a tactical strike having in mind the connection between two flanks. So a move on one flank affects what's going on the other flank. I want you to find such a move. And this possibility is possible because of a perfect location of all your pieces. Well, I don't care about the rooks, but these pieces are located really well. So rook c8 right now. What's the point of rook c8? Okay, so looks like John again was the first who suggested the correct order. Yeah, so yeah, you can start with queen f6 actually. Then the knight moves, and then you play g5, taking advantage of the pin. But it's better to play g5 first, the bishop retreats, and then queen f6, which is a double attack. These two pieces cannot be protected simultaneously. Well, queen f6 first is also a good move. Queen f6, let's say they continue with this, knight d1 maybe, who knows. Then g5, and yes, it's the problem, so they have to sacrifice the bishop here. And black is still winning. But g5 doesn't allow them to well, it does allow them to sacrifice. Maybe there is no big difference. But, well, yeah, so bishop went to e3, and after queen f6, the game was over. Okay, so looks like I didn't answer regarding the previous position, because when it's knight g4 was played, bishop takes g4, and then this is a fork, right? But you sacrificed two knights for rook, which is not enough. So let's say they just play queen e2, you take, queen takes, and that's it. Two minor pieces for rook and the pawn. Definitely not enough to play for a win for black. So knight g2 didn't work anyway, but knight h3 did win in that game. In this game, this tactical idea was based on the perfect coordination among the black pieces. So that useless bishop on c8 was exchanged, and other pieces found ideal positions. That's the reason why such a tactical strike happened, and white missed it. Okay, so I prepared actually 4 games for today. And if before we were mainly talking about tactics, this time let's talk about some tactics together with strategic plans. So this game played between Pavel Elyanov against Timur Rajabov illustrates how black plays on the queen side and combine it with the idea of playing f5. The move order was different, but finally the position led to the same pawn structure that we are talking about. So it started like it is King's Indian, but then knight g2 and c5. While when d5 was played, it was e6. And Black is about to take and get the same pawn structure as we usually get in Modern Benoni. Bishop g5, h6. So this time the bishop doesn't take. This bishop is too important to exchanges for the knight right now. That's why the bishop goes to f4. E takes d5 could make sense. That was probably the best move. And white would better continue with this. After that, knight a6, knight c7, a6, b5. This is a very standard plan in Modern Benoni. Well, Temur Rajabov didn't play it. He played knight g4, which is also a very interesting move because this is how he fights for the e5 square. Queen d2, so the pawn is not hanging, but we should keep an eye on it. Knight a6. If, for example, now h3 is played, how would you continue? Well, I think actually knight e5 is okay, because if they take here after the exchange, there is a bishop hanging on d3. So a3 to stop knight b4, maybe also to prepare this move in future. Not now, because this pin is quite dangerous. Knight goes to c7, f3 chasing the knight away, the knight goes to e5 and the pawn is not hanging. Castle. And finally, e takes d5, c takes d5 was played. Well, black continued with knight d3. Why did they play such a move? Well, if they, for example, played something logical like a6, how would the game continue? Who can tell me? Now imagine that you are white. What would you do if you were white in this position? So, Peter, answering your question regarding Benka Gambit. Yeah, Benka Gambit is a completely different opening. So the pawn structures that appear in Benka Gambit are quite different, and the whole point is that you are a pawn down in that type of the position, but you have the attack through the open files, and that affects that makes a serious difference. In Benka Gambit, your plan is more obvious. You're trying to attack through the open files as well as to pressure the pawn on e4. But in Modern Benoni, it's mainly about your piece's coordination, control over e5, trying to initiate b5 and not lose the pawn. So sometimes f5 too. Okay, so it's a separate opening, of course. So a4 to stop the pawn break. Well, yeah, but bishop e5 is better. If this bishop takes, it's a pawn loss. That's why black has to take with the pawn and make the bishop bad. Now the d pawn becomes a protected pass pawn, and just a4 is enough to illustrate that white is much better in this position. The only thing they need is to remaneuver this knight to a better spot. That's why knight d3, queen d3. And how would you play in this position for black? I think if a6, it's still a4. By the way, while you are thinking, I would like to ask you to like this video if you enjoy my content, as well as to share it with your friends, if they are chess players. If they are not, probably they are not interested. So b5 is the suggestion. Let's discuss it. So b5, what would happen in such a case? Well, no, I don't think they can take because it's too risky. There is bishop a6 move. Well, let's talk about this. Knight b5, knight takes b5, queen takes b5, and then maybe a5 with bishop a6. And the b2 is vulnerable too. I think black is okay in this position. So after b5, it should be something else. Maybe just queen d2. Yeah, b5 definitely deserves attention, but black played better. F5, it's too early to play F5, actually. They can just ignore it. G5 looks good. So, Brian, it seems to me that maybe 3 or 5 moves that you suggested are G5 today. Well, G5 right now, but what do you achieve with this move? Okay, so no, it's not possible to like on Twitch. It's possible to like on YouTube only. On Twitch, you can just follow me. But if you also have a YouTube account, you can like there. Okay, so G5 makes sense, but I think you do not control the E5 because they just retreat. And what I don't like about G5 move is that then they can undermine with H4. I'm not sure if they should do it immediately because g takes h4 and then the bishop is under attack, but I don't understand what g5 does. And then what, f5? Because g5 is a very responsible move because you weaken the king. Okay, so control over e5. Yeah, control over e5 is important. However, that's the reason of g5. Okay, what else do we have? f5, bishop d7, b6. This is the move that was played the game. The idea, well, you see, there is no way of this exchange. That's why the bishop goes to that flank, and potentially it can be exchanged for the knight on e2. Queen d2. The pawn is hanging, so king h7. Knight g3. Bishop goes there, rook f e1, and looks like the knight is attacking nothing. Or the bishop is attacking nothing. Okay, yes, nothing for a while. Rook e8, a4 stops b5. Now b5 doesn't look so good because then you cannot take with the knight because your bishop is hanging. But you have to take with the bishop. Then they take. Or actually, maybe they just play rook a3 with the idea to double and pressure a7 and take on b5 when they feel that this is a good moment. So b5 is generally a good idea, but can you suggest a better move for black? Okay, yes, Brian, I agree with you that g5, well, g5 doesn't weaken the king a lot because white doesn't have a light squared bishop. However, it still weakens the king. And I don't see the point. Okay, so we have a new chess player in our chat who suggests h5. Well, yeah, with the idea of h4, this is definitely typical for such positions. But the problem is that, well, okay, h5. Okay, let's say bishop g5. Would you play bishop f6 then? Because if you play this, they just do this. And after h4, well, knight h1, knight f2 looks good. Yes, it requires 2 tempi, but the position is closed. That's why slow plans should work. So, okay, h5 is one of the possibilities, but definitely not the best. Okay, yes, the move is bishop c4. The idea of such a move is to play a6 b5. What white should do? White instead should focus on their plan. They play knight f1 in order to disrupt the plan of black, but instead they'd better play this, opening the way for the f and the e pawn. So knight f1, knight e3 is coming, and after that the bishop will be trapped or would have to go back to a6, which is unfavorable. That's why they just simply take, because this bishop is considered to be useless in such a position. It only has one diagonal to attack, but there is nothing. So they take the knight, rook takes, and a6 with the idea of doing b5. Bishop g3, queen d7. In order to, when b5 is played, the rooks are exchanged in order to capture on a8 with the rook, but not with the queen. So rook a, e1, b5. In such a case, black can take advantage of their majority on the queen side and create a passed pawn. Well, this is where white realized that it's time for them to initiate any activity, and they played f4 with the idea of doing this. f5 would be definitely a good move, but instead it was b4 first, which maybe is slightly better. Knight d1 and then f5 in this position. So you remember I told you that such a move like f5 is possible when this pawn is on f4 and e5 for some reason doesn't work. This is the exact case. e5 doesn't work here because of d takes f5, f takes f5, and queen d5. So they lose the pawn on d5 in such a case. If they had their rook on d1, then f5, then e5 would work, and f5 would be a mistake. So remember about it. When you play f5, don't hope that they take or they let you take. Always consider something logical like e5 and play f5 if only you think that e5 favors you. So e takes f5, queen takes f5, knight comes to e3. Now what? This is where black combined their strategic ideas with some tactical strikes. So guess the move for black. Okay, so queen f6, yeah, okay, I see. So yeah, there was a correct suggestion. Rook takes knight, yes, rook takes d3, correct, and then bishop d4. That's right, but if you decide to play bishop d4 right away, that won't work. They take with the queen, c takes d4, and they take your queen, and your pawns are weakened. So that's why first you do this, and only then you pin. Well, they play this move. But after that, the game is completely lost. The d5 pawn is lost. Rook d1, and, well, if you take on e3, which is quite logical, looks like they can play b3, let's say, and try to move the queen to e4 and control your passed pawns. That's why there is no rush, just do this. And this endgame is completely winning. Queen takes, rook e3, and you're going to play this move and capture on b2. So let's say they take here, rook e2. b3, c4, take, b3, rook b6, b2, and then you do rook e1 and b1. So they have to play this move, but then you do rook c2 and rook c1 and you promote. So even c5 doesn't make sense. Take, and here black simply wins. So this rook endgame is won not only because of the extra pawn, but because of this pawn being far advanced. That's why after rook e8 it was bishop f2, but the game ended quite quickly. Knight takes the second pawn. So bishop e3, for example, how would you play in this position after bishop e3? So we are mainly talking about tactics today. Now, having in mind that probably the g2 square is weak, what do you think you should do? g5. Yeah, g5 looks nice, but no, you can play better than g5. Knight g2, well, knight g2, queen g2, it's rook e3, but knight g2, king g2. Then maybe queen g, okay. Okay, knight g2, okay. King takes, this. Maybe this move. So rook e3, queen d6. This. So this doesn't work, right? Because of a perpetual check. Well, it's not actually a perpetual check. Well, it is a perpetual check. So now if king goes there, it's this. Oh, it's not a perpetual check, right? It's a loss, and you have to give up the queen. So no, not because of knight g2. Queen g5 with rook e... Okay, yeah, John, I think you mean queen g4. Yes, queen g4 is correct. And then rook e2. Yeah, that's right. Queen g4. So bishop takes f4. You play this. How do they defend the g2 and the queen? Queen d5, but then queen f4, and you are still threatening with a mate. This check now doesn't make much sense. So, for example, this king goes there, and you just play queen f7, blocking it. And if they exchange, it's still the same rook endgame, which is completely losing for white. Well, in the game, it was queen takes d6, and the game ended quite quickly. This time with queen e4, there is no way to protect on g2. So they played a check, and after this move, they played there, but it was too late. This strategy doesn't work because of a discovered attack. So, well, in this game, I illustrated several plans. The most common idea here, well, the main idea was to activate the bishop in a different way, which is quite uncommon for modern Benoni, with b6 and bishop a6, because the bishop is kind of a useless piece here. While black is looking for how to exchange this bishop. And they did find it with bishop c4, because bishop c4 supports this pawn march, and now the bishop becomes really good. So finally the bishop was exchanged. Black played b5, and when they realized that white wants to do e5, they prepared f5 in order to undermine. Now e5 is not possible, and if e5 is not possible, then this pawn structure is ruined. Well, the pawns are separated, and they do not represent any strength anymore. Okay, so what do you think about today's webinar? So we were talking about typical plans. I was showing you two different types of the pawn structure, which you can meet in Benoni. So we analyzed 4 games, 3 were devoted to tactics, and the last one was about planning and tactics as well. So should we do such webinars, and if yes, which openings would you like to talk about? I also I recommend you to message me in case if you have any questions. You can message me at tricksofchess@gmail.com. So this is my mail if you have any questions. If also if you would like to ask me about coaching, you can also message me. And for those who wants to learn chess but doesn't know what to start with, I kindly recommend to schedule a free lesson with one of our coaches. Look at the screen. So this is the website of the online chess school that I co-founded. So if you want to schedule a free chess lesson with a professional coach, click here, choose the coach you want. There you see there are FIDE masters, international masters. Let's say international master Boroliu Zlatanovich. Choose the time that works for you. So let's say the 30th. Okay, you can also adjust your time zone. For example, I'm in America, Argentina, Buenos Aires. So then the time is adjusted to your time zone. Choose what you think is good for you. Let's say this. Enter your name, last name, and email, and proceed to payment. Well, this is a okay. No. That was yeah. This is a trial lesson. So we do not charge you anything, but we hold $2 on your card, and then this money is released after a few days. So enter your card number and your other details. Click book. So we are not. Again, we are not charging you anything for a trial class, but this is important because because sometimes students just book a trial class and do not appear, which is very disappointing for me as well as the coach that they scheduled the class with. And if people enter their credit card details, they are more serious about chess and they are unlikely to miss such a class. If you're looking for 1 hour class, then you can click here, book your lesson, and do the same thing. Choose the coach that you want, but this time you have to pay the whole amount. So for example, it's FIDE Master Armin Mushevich. Choose time and book the class. I'll provide you with the link to our website here in the chat. Do you have any questions? Okay, so I'm glad that you enjoyed my webinar. So how about similar plans and tactics for Rui Lopez and Nimza Indian? Well, probably, especially Nimza Indian. Yes. Okay, let me make a note about it. Okay, I just asked if it's usually good for the bishop to swap their bishop c8 in the opening. In which opening? So it depends. In Modern Benoni, yes. That's why, for example, you may see how, well, where was it? So here, for example, the bishop was exchanged for the knight on f3. Yes, in such a position. And hyper modern opening. What is hyper modern opening? You mean, well, it's Yeah, so not clear for me what hypermodern opening is. Maybe I can search it on Google. Oh, okay. So control the center with pieces. Well, okay. So John, this is a good question. So why it's good? The bishop is considered to be a good bishop, but no, because you can hardly find a good spot for this bishop, and on c8 the bishop is not doing anything. Moreover, there is a pawn barrier that stops you. That's an issue. Okay, guys. Yeah, thank you for joining, but we actually are finishing our webinar. So see you next weekend. If you have any questions, just message me, and make sure to like this video if you are watching it on YouTube.